Oop, oop, oh. Come on, come on, come on. No, no, shit! Oh, come on, you got this, George.
Unlike many gamers, I've had mixed feelings leading up to the release of this game. The Dark Souls series is known for its well thought out world design, obtuse story, and deep combat system. Fans of the series hail it as one of the best video game series of all time. They're the types of games one will look forward to every 3 years or so because of how complex, grand, and unique they are. In 2014, we got Dark Souls 2, and exactly 1 year later, we received Bloodborne, one of the best games of this console generation. And then exactly 1 year after that, we get the supposed last entry in the series, Dark Souls 3. We've gotten 3 games by From Software back to back every year in the past 3 years, so I've started to wonder if this unlikely series will lose its charm and just become more of the same by the time we receive the 3rd entry. After playing it, I can safely say that I was half right. Dark Souls 3 is basically more of the same, and while I personally don't think it's as good as Bloodborne, the series most certainly has not lost its charm. Set in the Kingdom of Lothric, you are known as an Ashen One, and you have to defeat the Lords of Cinder because that's what you were told to do. Basically, just like every other game made by From Software, the premise of Dark Souls 3 is simple and is explained to you early on, but the lore, characters, and the rest of the story can be completely missed even if you're paying close attention to everything that's going on. The only ways the story is loosely told is through vague conversations with NPCs, item descriptions, and environmental storytelling. It's confusing, dense, and obtuse. But to the small amount of people that put everything together, it's an even more rewarding experience than actually beating a Souls game, and that says a lot. Unlike almost every other video game series, Dark Souls 3's plot doesn't heavily rely on the player knowing what has happened in previous installments. It's one of the only sequels I can recall that can stand alone from the rest of the series. If you have never played a Dark Souls game before, then just know you don't need to feel obligated to play prior entries in the series or get caught up on the story through multiple YouTube videos. You could jump right into Dark Souls 3 and be just as confused as the rest of us. Dark Souls 3 looks incredible both graphically and aesthetically. It's obvious that it's taken some visual cues from Bloodborne with the gothic architecture and disturbing enemy design. While it very much looks like a Souls game, it is visually much more impressive. Areas are larger and more detailed, draw distances are much bigger, and particle effects always impress. The different areas you explore in the Kingdom of Lothric are all vastly different from one another, from the medieval castles in the High Wall of Lothric, to the Halloween town known as the Undead Settlement, to the dense, rotten woods and the Road of Sacrifices. As beautiful and enthralling as some of these places are, they are less creative, awe-inspiring, and, dare I say, cool as some of the most basic locations found in Bloodborne. While the game is graphically impressive, I can't escape the feeling that I've been to some of these places many times before. Most of the charm that came from exploring new areas that feel completely different from each other is lost because they are so familiar. The early game locations almost feel uninspired at times. And it doesn't help that the game uses the same color palette of faded shades throughout the entire game. While it does provoke the feeling of wandering through a destroyed, grim world, it gets a little bland at times. But the times where the game truly shakes things up visually are a lot more impactful because of this. And the way the different locations are interconnected with one another truly make it feel like you're exploring a real place. If you can see it in the distance, you will eventually go there in the game. While bland at times, the world of Dark Souls 3 is as well thought out and meticulously designed as almost any other entry in the series, which is all we wanted in the first place. The gameplay of Dark Souls 3 remains the same as the other From Software games. You choose what types of weapons you would like to start off with, and then you're let loose in the world to kill everything. Combat is almost exactly the same as in any other Souls game, where you have to carefully pay attention to your enemy's attack patterns and your stamina meter. You have light and heavy attacks, and you can parry most attacks with your shield if you choose to equip one. However, rolling around on the floor is still the most effective way to escape danger. Combat is a lot more fast-paced than in any other Souls game, though not as fast as it is in Bloodborne. Dark Souls 3 is still very much a stiff, thought-provoking action game where studying your enemy's moves and attacking at the right time is just as important as lightning-fast reflexes and decision-making. The biggest addition to combat though are the weapon arts, which are essentially alternate weapon attacks that use focus points. They're a great addition to the game, but they're very much targeted at hardcore fans of the series. Regardless, I had a lot more control over my character here than I did with any other Souls game, especially when it comes to the camera, which means when I died, I only have myself to blame. And yes, Dark Souls 3 keeps the series' reputation of being absolutely difficult. The difficulty curve in the beginning of the game, however, is much more gradual and natural than it has ever been in a From Software game. It's another reason as to why Dark Souls 3 happens to be the best game for newcomers to try out. But once the first few hours are over and done with, the game quickly reminds you as to how brutal Dark Souls actually is. Most of this is because of the incredible enemies and the unique gameplay scenarios the game throws at you. Enemies are just as creative as they've been in every other From Software game. While early on you'll be fighting against undead knights, zombies, and wild dogs, when the game becomes creative, it gets messed up. Fat witches that use multiple spells and that have large staffs, monkey-like creatures that look like R-rated versions of the monkeys from The Wizard of Oz, and big dudes that smash you with giant pots. Adapting to the enemy's attack patterns always becomes a challenge, especially when the game puts you in some crazy gameplay scenarios to fight your way through, which I won't spoil for you. In terms of pure gameplay, this is definitely the best Dark Souls game yet. And then we have the boss battles, and From Software makes some of the best bosses to be found in video games. Dark Souls 3 is sort of a mixed bag. It has some of the coolest boss battles in the series, and also some of the most uninspired. The boring ones are almost complete copies of bosses from other Souls games, and they're very easy to defeat. All I had to do was stay in the monster's crotch the whole time and I was safe. But bosses like the Cursed Rod of Greatwood are insanely creative and tricky to beat. I died a lot, but the satisfaction of winning is just as strong as it has ever been. And as a heads up, the bosses you come across near the end of the game are mind-blowing. The game will take you around 30 to 40 hours to go through on the first playthrough. Replay value consists of playing the game multiple times to unlock the other endings, and to make different choices throughout the journey, try New Game Plus, and to unlock the countless amount of secrets the game has to offer, like hidden areas, weapons, enemies, and bosses that you could have missed. Dark Souls 3 is exactly what you think it is. It's the third Dark Souls. So if you've played a Souls game before, you already know what to expect. A brutally punishing game that challenges your wits, reflexes, and determination to get through its complex, beautifully designed world, even though we may have seen some of these places before. The combat is tight and well thought out, the enemies are well designed and difficult to fight against, and the way the levels are intertwined force you to think outside the box when it comes to how video games are played. If you've never played a Souls game before, or you love Bloodborne and want to try out its sibling series, Dark Souls 3 is the most accessible game in the series, and you should definitely give this a shot. If you're a fan of the Souls series already, you've probably already played this game and just want to see what I think about it. It may not be doing anything game-changing, and it may be more of the same, but this is still something special. Dark Souls 3 receives a 9 out of 10. If you want to help out an amateur video game journalist such as myself to make it in the big world, all you have to do is subscribe to Bathroom Gamers. Thank you for watching, and stay fresh.